That's right. Today we're talking about the devil's lettuce. This is actually cabbage, but how's that for an intro? What am I doing? Whenever I see on social media or the news or anything like that a video about marijuana, it usually comes from one of two extremes. The first extreme is weed is bad, it rots your brain, it'll turn you into a vegetable, you'll never move out of your mom's basement. And the other extreme, weed is natural, so it's healthy, and there's been 0 overdoses on weed, and it's good for you.
It's green, so it's nature.
In my experience, the truth is usually somewhere between the two extremes. And today we're going to kind of cover a piece of that truth. I think an entire video about all of the implications of weed and mental health would be very, very long, very disorganized, and not wildly helpful. For right now, we're just going to cover the connection or the link between cannabis and schizophrenia or psychosis. Now, this isn't going to be a don't smoke weed video, but it's also not going to be a weed is fine, smoke however much you want video. Instead, this is going to be a video about the connections between cannabis use, certain genetic mutations in some people, and psychosis or schizophrenic symptoms. And because marijuana is technically a medication, it can be prescribed, I feel obligated to reiterate the fact that I am not a doctor. This is not medical advice. If you're looking for medical advice, please go see a doctor. Do not take medical advice from myself or honestly anyone on the internet because it's not personalized to you. The idea with this video is that you can understand what psychosis and schizophrenia symptoms might look like so that if you or someone you love is a heavy smoker, you can start to recognize those and see a doctor if you need to. Psychosis is a general term for a feeling of detachment from reality. Symptoms of psychosis or a psychotic episode, which is just a period of psychosis, include delusions, which are strong beliefs that don't change even if they're proven wrong, hallucinations, which is experiencing things that aren't real. They can be from any of the 5 senses. So you can see things that aren't real, hear things that aren't real, smell things that aren't real, etc. Next is weird or disorganized behavior, and last is low emotional expression or motivation. Please keep in mind that some of these behaviors or symptoms can be caused by the substance itself and not be a warning sign. Like, for example, in college, I had a buddy that after a night out took a bag of bread, a loaf of bread, and started giving it out to strangers on the street. That's weird behavior, but it happened once, and it wasn't significantly weird enough for me to be worried. Schizophrenia is a mental illness that's like a long-term psychosis, right? I'm oversimplifying here, but that's good enough for our purposes, so some more warning signs to look out for. If you start to see a collection of these symptoms, like multiple at the same time, or if any of them start to get really, really bad and affect yourself or a loved one, then it might be time to go talk to a doctor about, hey, like I'm seeing some symptoms and I know that they could be warning signs. Let's talk about it, right? That's what we're doing. Now you know what the warning signs could look like. On to our conclusions. The data I found showed that people with a certain genetic mutation who used cannabis were associated with a greater risk of psychosis or a psychotic disorder like schizophrenia. That's the first one. Next, people with a certain genetic mutation who used cannabis were associated with lower attention spans. And our last conclusion, although there isn't strong enough data to conclude that cannabis use definitely causes psychosis, there is enough data to at least understand there's a risk factor associated between cannabis use and psychosis or schizophrenia symptoms. That's our conclusions. On to the data now. If you found what you were looking for, thank you so much for tuning in, subscribe, all that good stuff. But if you're a nerd like me, this data is pretty cool. We're talking about genetics, we're talking about cannabis use, we're talking about psychosis symptoms and attention spans and all that stuff. It's pretty cool. Let's get into it. Before we start, a quick refresher on genetics. Inside your body, you have a bunch of genes. And genes are essentially just instruction manuals that show your body how to build anything it could ever need, right? Your genes affect your hair color to your brain chemistry and a bunch of stuff in between. You have genes from your mom and you have genes from your dad. And when those genes merge, when you're born, sometimes mutations can occur. Some mutations do nothing, some mutations have positive effects, and others can have negative effects, but just know that mutations aren't inherently bad. Scientists call certain types of mutations polymorphisms. In the data we're talking about today, they use the words single nucleotide polymorphism, or SNP, or SNP. For our purposes, it's a mutation. Easy enough. On to the science. There is a gene called AKT1. My name's Carl. That gene is called AKT1. It's just the name of it. And there is a specific type of mutation called the RS2494732 mutation, or single nucleotide polymorphism. Right? We talked about that before. All that is it's just an identifier for a specific mutation that happens on the AKT1 gene. A 2016 study found that this mutation on this gene was a significant predictor of psychotic symptoms for people while intoxicated. So essentially, they took two groups of people, one with this mutation, one without, and they tested them on two separate days. One day when they were smoking weed, and the other when they weren't. And they found that the people with this mutation, while smoking weed, had a higher chance of exhibiting psychotic symptoms. Those ones that we talked about before. The study also cites some previous research, some previous literature on the AKT1 gene and this specific mutation. That literature shows that there is a 2 times risk of psychotic disorder diagnosis, something like schizophrenia diagnosis, in people with this AKT1 mutation, and that people with this mutation performed worse on tasks that required longer attention spans if they were a user of cannabis. Another mutation on a different gene, this time the RS1076560 on the DRD2 gene, showed a lifetime cannabis use was associated with an increased risk of a psychiatric disorder for those people that have this mutation on this gene. Again, not saying that lifetime cannabis use causes a psychiatric disorder, saying that people with this specific genetic mutation on this specific gene that are lifetime cannabis users showed an increased risk of a psychiatric disorder. Schizophrenia would be an example of that, something like that. Your next question is probably, can I get a genetic test to see if I have these specific genetic mutations? And the answer is, honestly, I'm not sure. I checked the 23andMe website and I didn't see either of these mutations on them. But this is a better question for your doctor. Your doctor is going to have access to more genetic test options that are more specific than anything you can do at home. And even if they don't have the option to test for these specific mutations, that's all the better reason to understand the warning signs, so that even if you're not sure if you have this mutation or not, you understand the warning signs and you can still protect yourself and your loved ones. That's the whole idea of this video. That's what we're doing here. Okay, let's recap. Now you know the warning signs of psychosis and schizophrenia kind of generally, and you know that there are certain genetic mutations in people, in certain people anyway, that contribute to a greater risk of psychotic symptoms or a psychiatric disorder like schizophrenia. Like I said before, this is not a weed is bad video. This is a these are the facts video. And the facts are that in certain people with certain genetic mutations, cannabis use is associated with a greater risk of psychotic symptoms or a psychotic disorder like schizophrenia. Now you know. So if someone you love or yourself starts exhibiting the symptoms, you can go to a doctor and have a conversation about potential treatments and actually have an idea of what you're talking about so that you can be more successful overall. Good luck. You got this. Also, last week was Nurses Week, so thank you so much to all the nurses out there that are, putting in hours and hours, weird shifts, dealing with people at their worst sometimes, and just, making us better. Thank you so much to all the nurses out there. We appreciate you.